Hey everyone, it's me Lone, hope you're doing alright. Let's talk about the future of Fallout 76. Recently, Bethesda held their QuakeCon event, and while there wasn't any new information that was shared about Starfield there, unfortunately, there was a little bit of news shared about Fallout 76. They held a panel with several members of the Bethesda Game Studios team. It was also hosted by Kev DeWitt, which was awesome for him. And they went into heavy detail, as you would imagine, about the Pitt and Expeditions. Of course, that's their new next big update for the game, so it makes sense that they talked about the Pitt a lot. But there was a bit of information shared about the future of Fallout 76 there, and I want to talk about it because there's tons of other videos about what was said about the Pit. It's been in the PTS for a while, so we know what it's going to be about, but I want to focus on what was said about the future of the game and kind of provide what I believe to be a fairly strong video that outlines and summarizes what the future of Fallout 76, at least in this current point in time, what the future of the game is going to be most likely. This is based upon my knowledge of the game, my history there at Bethesda, and what I saw come out of this panel at QuakeCon. So if you enjoy this video, please like it. I would really appreciate it. Subscribe if you're new, but let's get into the video. Alrighty, so let's talk about the future of Fallout 76, and to do so, I believe it's going to be helpful to split this video off into different sections. As I mentioned, the panel at QuakeCon heavily revolved around the Pit, as you would imagine, and that's definitely one aspect I'm going to be talking about, probably the biggest aspect of this video. But first, let's talk about some other things. Number one, Appalachia and new story content. There was some commentary that took place during that QuakeCon panel about what new story content is going to be coming to the game that's not expeditions. And really, this is the content that's going to still involve the current map of Appalachia. We know that BGS wants to explore new locations with expeditions. That's exactly why they're introducing them to the game, but there is still clearly an interest in the team to tell new stories within Appalachia. So let me cover what they said in the panel, and I'll go into it in a little bit more detail. Alrighty, so during the panel, they did stress, as I mentioned, that they do have stories that they want to continue to tell in Appalachia. Of course, it's the map of the game, you can't abandon it entirely, and they still want to do stuff when it comes to Appalachia. So expeditions, in their eyes anyways, is not necessarily going to be the primary source of content for Fallout 76 moving forward. Yes, they're going to be doing new expeditions, but it's not everything. They're going to do more quests, more public events, daily ops, gameplay features, and quote-unquote traditional content that we'd expect beyond that. They have a lot of big plans, especially heading into next year. They are not just doing expeditions. They really did stress that. In terms of those next year plans, they are dedicated to adding, of course, more expeditions, but also other content and features like, expanding the item game. They talked about more interesting ways to interact with camp building. They mentioned sharing camps as a feature that they want to bring to the game, which is cool for you camp builders out there. And they hope to have more details coming out early next year. And all this stuff, by the way, is in early pre-production, so they've already started the preparations and planning for that. They also spoke about Nuka World on Tour, which is kind of the next big update after the Pit. And this is the content that 11 is working on. So this is the new developer that's been brought on to help create content for Fallout 76. I made a video about that separately. So 11 is going to be working on heavily on Nuka World. They already have done work on Fallout 76 in the past, but this is probably their first big thing that they're doing, seemingly kind of separately or independently somewhat from BGS. BGS is always going to have a hand involved and they're going to help them, but it seems like 11, this is their first task that they're really taking on their own. As part of that, there's going to be 3 new public events, a new setting, a new region boss, and players can obviously earn new rewards. So let's talk about Appalachia. Obviously, there's going to be more content when it comes to Appalachia, new quests, new public events, all that kind of stuff, the typical stuff that you'd expect when it comes to Fallout 76, right? But in that panel, the question was asked by Kev DeWitt whether we're going to be seeing any new story content like Wastelanders or like Still Rain and Still Dawn. And I don't want to say that they said no because they were very coy about it. They didn't want to share too many details. And it might very well be down the line that they announce another piece of story content like those, ones that I mentioned before. But my honest opinion is that I think BGS is done with that kind of content. I do not see them going back, especially to the content like Still Rain and Still Dawn, where people can complete that thing within 2-3 hours and then that's it. I cannot see that being worthwhile for the team. Why would you spend all those hours in developing a piece of story content that people can finish within a couple of hours. It's just not realistic. Yes, I would love to see a Wastelanders style piece of story content come back to Fallout 76. Wastelanders, there was a decent amount of content in there, but with the size of the team and how everyone at BGS is pretty much focused on Starfield, it seems at this stage, I don't think we're going to be getting a Wastelanders sized piece of story content for Fallout 76 honestly ever again, unless the game really picks up traction and starts making a hell of a lot more money than it is now. I think those days are done. If we were to get any new piece of quote-unquote story content, it's probably going to be Still Rain and Still Dawn sized, and as I said, I don't think that's worth it. I don't think it's worth just releasing something with all this effort to have people finish within a night. Even slower players can still finish that comfortably within a few sessions, let's say a week max, and that's it. And is that really the kind of content you want to be pushing for Fallout 76? It is not bringing back players to the game, really. It's not moving the needle. It's not increasing the replayability of the game. It's not, honestly, adding much to Fallout 76 anymore. And I know a lot of you probably will be disappointed by that, and I'm not saying that new story content can't do any of those things. I'm saying if it's not going to be as big as Wastelanders or bigger, then it's not worth it. If it's only going to be the size of Still Rain and Still Dawn, then it's probably not worthwhile, and I think BGS understands that. They understand the situation that they're in, especially with Fallout 76's player base and probably the money that it's bringing in. It is stagnant, if not decreasing. It'll probably bump back up a little bit with the Pitt, but then go back down. If things don't seriously change with Fallout 76 in terms of its success, and I don't think that it will, I think it's going to keep doing its thing, then we're probably not going to see anything Wastelanders sized. So why focus on that kind of content if it's just Still Rain or Still Dawn sized? That's my honest opinion. I think they're going to, of course, they're going to keep doing new quests and all that, utilizing the existing map of Appalachia. I expect them to do that, but even though they technically didn't say it, I think a lot of that new stuff, the fresh and fancy stuff that they're going to be bringing to Fallout 76 is probably going to be expeditions, is going to be new locations that we can go to that's exciting and fresh, that's not just Appalachia. That's my humble opinion, even though they didn't technically say that outright in the panel. So the next section I want to talk about very quickly, it's just a minor one, is seasons and rewards. So obviously they confirmed they're going to be new seasons in Fallout 76. I don't think they're ever going to drop seasons. So season 10 is going to be about the Pit, and season 11 will be about Nuka World, or it's going to be Nuka World themed as part of that content. So they talked about a bunch of the specific themed content and rewards that's going to be coming as part of those seasons. And also there's going to be other new rewards as well, new features. They specifically mentioned a free camp building mode, which again will be very cool for you camp builders out there. But obviously Fallout 76 is probably forever going to have seasons, and it's forever going to have new rewards so long as they're making money. That's my honest opinion about that. Alrighty, so let's finally get to expeditions. This again was by far the biggest part of the panel at QuakeCon, and they focused heavily on the Pit in that regard, as you could imagine. But I want to talk about expeditions more in general and what I believe they mean to the future of Fallout 76. Now, I want to stress again, Bethesda Game Studios in that panel really did want to say that expeditions is not all that they're doing for Fallout 76. But as I mentioned, when it comes to moving the needle of Fallout 76 and the kind of content that has the biggest chance of increasing the player base for the game, I think that is expeditions clearly. It's not the kind of content like Nuka World on Tour where it's just new public events, new quests, new regional bosses, etc. That's going to be fun for the existing player base of Fallout 76. It's going to be fun for the people that are in the end game that want something different. Essentially, this is the kind of content that's going to help pad out the end game, but it's not seriously bringing players back to the game. Really, that is expeditions. Expeditions is the stuff that actually has a chance to significantly increase the player base of Fallout 76. Or even just a little bit increase the player base, right? So even though it's not all that they're doing, I think it's going to be their biggest focus. I think it's going to be where all their marketing dollars go to when you look at what they actually release. So expeditions is definitely going to be the focus. And the way that I see things, planning out is that 011, the team that they brought on, they're probably going to be responsible for that content that helps pad out the end game, that helps actually pad out Appalachia as a map. So again, Nuka World on Tour, new quests, new public events, new regional bosses. 011 is probably primarily going to be tasked with that kind of content, which leaves the BGS team that's still primarily working on Fallout 76, specifically the Austin team. It leaves them to work on expeditions. I think they're going to be the ones that are tasked with, or are tasking themselves with, if you will, bringing new locations to Fallout 76 like the Pit and using expeditions to do that. So 11, the regular kind of endgame content in Appalachia, and BGS themselves in Austin, they're going to be working on new locations with expeditions. I think that's how it plans out. I could be wrong. We could see what happens, but I think that's a fairly strong, outlook for Fallout 76 and how the teams are split. So when it comes to expeditions, in that panel, they kind of talked about 4 areas in general when it comes to them. So of course they talked about new locations, but they also talked about storyline briefly, factions briefly, and also new missions / randomization and a new system that they're bringing in to make expeditions and that, randomized repeatable content a little bit more interesting and fresh. So we'll be tackling those subcategories one by one. So let's of course start off with locations. So they said in that panel that expeditions really does enable the team to keep introducing other locations to Fallout 76. That's the entire point of expeditions. They are currently in early pre-production of where they want to go next, but they didn't confirm what that location was. They did ask the question, why the Pit for the first expedition? They said that they always wanted to revisit a location of some kind, especially because of the prequel setting of Fallout 76. It's only set, fairly soon after the bombs dropped, and you don't really get that in Fallout games. So because of that interesting timeline and setting of Fallout 76, it makes it interesting to visit locations like the Pit again to see what's going on. Plus, the Pit is arguably the fan favorite Fallout 3 DLC, so they wanted to go back and see that DLC from a different angle. Plus, as a DLC location, it isn't necessarily as fully fleshed out as Boston is or as Washington DC is, so they have much more freedom to expand upon the city and the lore of the city. Thematically as well, they said that Appalachia is so different to the Pit, which is why the Pit made for a nice first expedition. So from that, of course, again, we're going to get new locations with expeditions. That's the entire point. And what those locations are, I don't know. But I think what they mentioned about DLC is interesting. I think at least the first few expeditions that we get are probably going to revolve around the locations that are DLC in Fallout 3 and Fallout 4. I don't think New Vegas is relevant. Location-wise, it isn't even close to Appalachia. Plus, BGS didn't work on that game, so I think they're going to leave New Vegas content and New Vegas locations. But at least when it comes to Fallout 3 and Fallout 4, I think they'll try and revisit the DLC locations that were introduced in those games. As an example, Fallout 4 and Far Harbor. I think that makes complete sense to revisit that location and that DLC. And maybe as well, when it comes to the 4 maps, maybe certain parts of the maps that weren't fully explored or fully utilized. But they did mention there that, lore-wise, it's harder for them to explore the entire map of Fallout 3 or the entire map of Fallout 4. It also requires a lot more work on their side, and they have a small team at the moment. But it's harder for them to revisit that. So I think it's most likely, when you look at the DLC for Fallout 3 and Fallout 4, those are probably the locations that we're going to be getting in expeditions moving forward. Plus, that also has the added benefit that they already have assets in place for those locations and those DLC. I think the reason why we were able to get the Pit is because they could essentially, this is very simplistic explanation by the way, but they could essentially import the Pit from Fallout 3 into Fallout 76 and use those existing assets, use the existing map design as much as they could. When you're starting from fresh, it takes much longer. It's probably not feasible given the size of the team. So that's probably what we're going to be seeing moving forward is Fallout 3 and Fallout 4 DLC. And if expeditions move the dial enough, if the player base is significantly increased for Fallout 76 moving forward, maybe we will see the wider map of DC. Maybe we will see even like part of the map of Fallout 4, whatever it might be, or a location that's not a DLC location. Eventually, they're going to run out of DLC locations, so they can't just do those. But I think for the next at least two or three expeditions, that's probably a safe bet for the new locations that we'll see. When it comes to the storyline, they mentioned that they want to take the opportunity to tell stories in other locations at around the time of Fallout 76, just a couple of decades after the bombs drop, to see what's happening there. So all that says is that they're not going to be doing any massive time jumps in terms of, the year that the games are at, or that the content is taking place in the expeditions. It's probably going to be taking place almost at the exact same time as Fallout 76 right now. Like when it comes to the Pit, you have the responders flying from that location, Appalachia, going to the Pit. That's probably going to be the premise for all these other expeditions. So those expeditions are going to be taking place at around the same time as the game is now. So we're not going to be having massive jumps in time or even going back in the past, I don't believe. It's going to be at around that time. In terms of factions, they mentioned that the beauty of expeditions is that they allow the team to visit existing factions in the Fallout universe that haven't been introduced or seen in Fallout 76 yet, but they also allow them to revisit existing factions in Fallout 76, primarily the Responders, and that's what we're seeing with the Pitt, and also introduce new factions. They definitely plan to do more of that moving forward. So would love to see new factions keeping introduced to the Fallout universe. I think that just adds to the lore. It's interesting. I just want to see more factions that aren't just splintered groups of raiders. I think we've seen a lot of raiders, a lot of different types of raiders in Fallout 76. I think we need new factions that aren't raiders, that are a little bit different and interesting. So hopefully they do stick with that. I think probably the existing factions in Fallout 76 are now done. If the Responders are going to be that core base group that allows us to explore all these other locations with expeditions, I'm fine with that. But let's keep introducing new factions or revisiting some of the other factions already introduced in the Fallout universe. I think that sounds good. And finally, let's talk about new missions and randomizations. They mentioned in that panel that they developed a new technology called the Quest Module System for expeditions. Essentially, this tech allows the team to put a ton of objectives for expeditions and then randomly choose those objectives in different orders. So each time an expedition run feels a little bit different. They want to keep adding new modules and new missions to expeditions, and they're going to be using this new tech or system to achieve that. This system also allows them to more easily add new content, which is cool. They're also in the early stages of planning additional content for the Pit. I think they're talking about additional modules or additional objectives for the Pit, in addition to the ones that we already have now. And then they're going to be moving on to new expeditions after that. So what this confirms is that, one, they have this new system that essentially allows for a lot of randomized content, right? So when you're talking about the Pit, let's just lay it out a bit more simplistically. You have an expedition, and you have a ton of different objectives. This new system allows them to keep feeding new objectives into it, and then it'll randomize it and spit it out for each new expedition run that you do, so it feels different. Essentially, it is a much more thought out and planned daily ops, and I know some people can see that as a negative, but at least they're trying to improve upon the repeatability of it, or the replayability of it. But essentially, that's what it is. Also, it confirms that they're planning to add new missions and new objectives, new content, quote unquote, to the Pit as well. So what we see at launch for the Pit isn't just what it is. It's going to be improved and added upon a little bit more after that. But then after that, they're moving on to new expeditions. So I think it re-emphasizes the fact that expeditions is about repeatable content. It is about randomization. Hopefully this new tech, this new system truly does make every run feel different. I think that's the biggest concern that a lot of us have had when it comes to expeditions, is that when it is just a daily ops 2.0, eventually once you've done all those objectives and you've been in that map a ton of times and you've done all these runs, then it doesn't feel fresh and doesn't feel new. I think the point is to try and drag that out as much as they can to make the Pit feel interesting for as long as possible, to give them as much time as they need to make the next content, to make the next location, to make the next expedition. I think that's the entire point of this quest module system, and hopefully they can keep iterating on it and making sure that the Pit is as interesting for as long as it can be. At the end of this video, I did want to tack on an additional topic that wasn't talked about at the panel, but I think is interesting, and that is modding. I mentioned in my last video that I might make a separate video on the modding situation for Fallout 76. I'm just going to tack it on here because it is relevant to the future of Fallout 76. Todd mentioned several times that they wanted to bring modding to Fallout 76 and allow players to mod the game. I genuinely don't know, hand to heart, I don't know whether modding is ever going to come to Fallout 76. I have said, at least to myself anyways, and to other people, I've said that modding probably should be the future of Fallout 76. Once BGS is actually done with creating new content, 11 is done with creating new content, they're done with creating new expeditions and new locations, and they've properly moved on to other games like Starfield and Elder Scrolls 6. Once they're done with all of that, I think that is literally the perfect time to say, have at it with that game. You can mod it as much as you want, you can create your own world, you can do whatever you want. That is probably the twilight of Fallout 76 in my eyes, or at least it should be the twilight. It should be the thing that allows the community to take that game wherever they want to take it, right? Because at some stage, BGS, They can't support Fallout 76 forever. We know that. So let the community handle it. I think that should be the future of Fallout 76, the long-term future of 76. Is that going to happen? Definitely not anytime soon. This is clearly where their focus is. New expeditions, other content by 11. But I still think that there is a chance that we get modding, and I think modding is going to play that part. It's going to allow 76 to have a future beyond BGS supporting it. So again, let me know what you think. I'm keen to know what you believe the future of Fallout 76 is going to be. What do you think about my opinions when it comes to the future of 76? And until next time, this has been Lone. Please take care of yourselves, and would you kindly keep fighting the good fight.